Go ahead. You pleased with where you are through the first, third of the camp?
Yeah, I think guys are working really hard, and I think they've done a really, really good job. Not just this camp, but certainly throughout the summer. It's built in the culture here. It's important to them, and so super fortunate and pleased at how bad they want it.
Taylon says you don't want him to play like a robot. What does that mean, and why is that important for a guy with Taylon's skill set?
Yeah, I think it's hard. I think initially maybe you go in and you're not prepared to be playing, and your natural instincts take over. Then you get into year two, you start learning more defensive schemes, and you can start to overthink things. So I think it's just so important for him. Stick to those buzz terms, stick to those quick reminders, but ultimately just go cut it loose.
How fine is the line, I guess, when it comes to that stuff, when you want to rely on your natural abilities, but also have to stay in the framework of what you want to accomplish on offense?
Yeah, as long as he's not turning it over, we kind of let him do whatever he wants, But I think, as you know, you say that, and all of a sudden it becomes off-schedule plays. For him, it's just critical not to do too much. You know what I mean? Just let the game come to him. He naturally, with his ability, is going to create explosive plays, and so that's the biggest thing with him. I think his focus is just not trying to do too much.
Did that trust in his ability and to let him be free, did that come right away, or was that something that took a couple months to kind of for you to build up to?
Yeah, I think it's just important. You're a coach. You sit in the office all day. You're very black and white, and sometimes these kids they have a way of playing. They've been playing for a long time, and you just got to be very careful about not taking that part of their game away from them. And so I think sometimes you got to reel them back in, but you got to let their natural instincts take over.
As far as Taylon running, natural instincts taking over, we saw him last year.
Sure.
What's the challenge of you saying, no, in certain situations, Taylon, I don't want your instincts to take over. You want to beat people from the pocket, you would think. Is that kind of the rub with Taylon, and what's it like?
Yeah, I think the two things that come to mind, one would be, obviously from a health standpoint, protecting yourself. When you're in the open field, you can't necessarily be a guy at the quarterback position that's carrying it 30, 35 times a game. I think the second thing, though, for him, that final step, if you will, of his game is going to be playing in the pocket. I think you look at all the great quarterbacks, you look at the NFL guys, the one consistent thing is guys that in critical situations can take the space they need, only the space they need, and hang in there tough and deliver balls in the pocket.
How would you rate, from when you started to now, Taylon's ability in the pocket and his ability as a passer?
Yeah, I think it's improving for sure. So there's been improvement. I do think there's still a certain amount of way we got to go with it, And I think I always tell them this. There's like a Tom Brady quote where Brady said, "Hey, I never had the ability, even when I was a young kid, to escape the pocket and outrun people." Right? This guy's different. He's always had that ability to use that speed, and so with that being the case, as you guys know, at this level of football, there's speed all over the place, right? So we're training him. We're trying to get him as many reps as what it looks like to just stay in there, push up in the pocket, and again, when those long runs happen, they happen.
Putting together a playbook sounds like a daunting task. So, how long did it take you? Where do you start? And how many hands were in the kitchen in this?
Yeah, it's awesome, but it's also miserable at the same time. I think nowadays too, and you guys know it, it's like social media, there's more this clip of this team running that and this clip. And so I think the biggest thing is just narrowing it down to, okay, what does our quarterback do well, right? Who are our best players? How are we going to get them the ball? And do it in a way where there's enough, but also concise enough for the players to keep executing and get good at it. So I'm super appreciative of this offensive staff. I think they've done a great job over the last 2 years of kind of going through some different avenues, if you will, to find out who they want to be. So it's been a collective effort, and I'll be honest with you. I think a lot of it too is even with talking with the head coach and the defensive staff about what gives them problems. So it's really a good mixture of everything.
How many plays?
I was just going to follow up. Is there any player that is in your ear a lot with ideas or tries to convince you?
Yeah,
to
there's
put
a bunch of
stuff in?
guys that are always, we get a day off, everybody seems to be texting me, hey, look at this, look at that. So there's probably not one guy, I think, but again, with some of those veteran guys, they've been through it, they understand it, and so when it's something, every offense has an identity. They got plays that they run a lot. So I think when players see some stuff, hey, this could look good off of that, you got to certainly take that into account.
We've heard some guys say that Eric might be a future offensive coordinator with as many plays as he suggests. Does he
McAllister?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he probably plays here, does schoolwork, and plays Madden all day. So But Eric's as awesome a dude as there is, and just always got funny things to say here and there. But most of his plays have him being the primary target. So that's what I'm for.
Sticking with Eric, he mentioned last week, he wants to be known as more than just a deep threat. He wants to work on his routes. How are you seeing him coming along with those?
Yeah, Eric has done a really nice job. I think at that position, it always just comes back to consistency, right? Like, I've been fortunate to coach that position for many, many years. The amount of running that those guys do on a daily basis is probably the highest workload of the team. And so for Eric, it's just going to come down to consistently playing at the pace that he can play with. Because when he's fresh, when he's playing fast, I think he's as explosive a guy as I've been around. So.
What type of ball camp does Steph Jobs have? I mean, he's in his 6th year.
Yeah.
Last year, the time he's coming off an injury, he looks pretty explosive from what we've seen.
Yeah.
What kind of falls he have?
Steph is like old reliable. You know what I mean? You know exactly what you're going to get. I think he's a guy, in my opinion, that can play football for a long, long time. He's smart, he's tough, he makes plays, and he's pretty steady. So that's what I would say. Again, he's made certainly some high-end plays, which have been promising. But he's a guy who knows where he's supposed to be. He's smart, he's tough, and he's done a great job.
How would you analyze the QB2 situation, and have you seen any separation?
Interesting. I think Matson from a completion percentage standpoint. I mean, the guy is pretty composed. I think we saw that out of him certainly in the spring game. He knows where to go with the ball. He's never too high, never too low. C.J. Tiller, on the other hand, he's got some pretty impressive arm talent and the ability to make plays. So it's just unique, right? Every quarterback room you're in, you always go, hey, we want you to take a little bit of this guy's game and put a little bit of his game together. And so I'm pleased with both those guys from the standpoint of being able to go out there and execute.
Is there any separation yet?
Again, I mean, I think we're certainly going to take this thing throughout this week, and both those guys know it. I would say both of them, have their strengths, have their weaknesses, and it'll be interesting for sure.
When you've used the clock during camp, in the scrimmage, running the clock on first downs up until the last 2 minutes, what effect do you think that's going to have on games?
I think it'll have an effect. I think anytime you go from 75, 80 plays to 65, 70 plays, you certainly got to make the most out of each play in every drive. I remember the years of sometimes maybe being in the Pac-12 and going to play Stanford in their heyday, and you'd be sitting there in the third quarter and you'd only have 35 offensive snaps. So that's what we're really trying to get a feel for is how many plays are going to get cut out of each game, and but the focus is always on execution. The focus is going to be on each play and having great drives.
More about Steph. Without Latrell, he led your guys' team in yards after catch last year. 2 years ago, Steph had some long breakaway runs. Most of them were kind of breakaway runs instead of making a bunch of guys miss. But can he make a difference in that area for this offense without Latrell?
Yeah, I think so for sure. Yards after catch is one of the biggest things we stress at that wide receiver position. And so I think for all those guys, right, but naturally when you play that slot position and you're making a lot of those plays in between the hashes, you don't get out of bounds very much, so you got the ability to stick your foot in the ground and make people miss, and it's certainly something we're working on.
Some of the guys have talked about that, experimenting a little bit with Ashton maybe in the slot or trying to get Ashton and George on the field at the same time. How have those experiments gone, and what could Ashton bring as a pass catcher?
Yeah, it's gone good. I think it's certainly something, again, right, when you identify who your top 11 players are, I think it's the job of the coordinator, right, to keep those 11 players on the field as much as possible. Certainly we're also thinking too, right, you don't want to wear those two guys out and be in a situation where the tailback in the game is not necessarily ready, but it's gone well. We're continuing to work with those backs. I know Ashton has done some of that in high school, and so there's a natural part to that, but it's a work in progress for sure.
From everything we've heard, Jordan and Ashton have a fantastic relationship. Just how does that kind of help the continuity of the offense?
I think it's huge. I do. I mean, when you got, when some of your high-end players and most talented guys are also the most low-ego guys, it makes things a lot easier, as we know. And it starts with George. I just think he's a veteran guy who, that culture again of here comes Ashton coming in as a young guy. It's not, hey, let me keep the information away from him. It's let me give him everything I can give him so he doesn't make the same mistakes I made. And so I think when that's the type of leadership you are, George is not always the loudest guy in the room, but he's one of the more respected guys, and I think that's huge.
In 18 days, you'll be playing Washington. They came out today, this morning, number 10. You obviously have a ton of connections there. How emotional is that game going to be for you?
It'll be, you know, I think for maybe like a lot of the players, I don't know. For me, certainly, yeah, it's not going to be just another game. I'm not going to sit here and say that. I can't even remember if I've been to the visitor locker room, right? Put a lot into that program, and we feel we had a lot of success. But as you guys know, man, I mean, you coach long enough, you're at a lot of places. Once that whistle goes, it's right back to focus on what you got to get done.
There's you know, obviously they're a pretty balanced team in the third top 10. It starts with their offense, but what do do they have a top 10 defense, you feel?
We think they're a talented group for sure. I mean, we know a lot of those guys, you know, so offensively, defensively, I think that was, you know, a lot of those guys are probably that last class when Coach Pete was there. They're definitely, you know, big and athletic up front. Certainly on the back end can play. So it's going to be a good challenge for us again. But number one thing for these guys is understanding what we're getting ourselves into and going in there with an attack mindset and playing fast.
Who do you think Coach Pete's rooting for?
That I don't know, man. I don't know. You know, who knows if he's even going to watch the game. Hopefully he's golfing somewhere relaxing. So.
Now, you've coached in the pros, and obviously they have, I guess, now 3 preseason games. So what's the biggest difference getting ready for week 1 in the pros versus getting ready for week 1 in college?
Yeah, I just go back to that 18 to 19-year-old factor. You know, I think certainly with those pros, you're looking at guys, it's an off season, it's preseason, it's their first game of the year. But for a lot of those guys, it's their 12th first game, you know, and so I just think, you know, naturally when you're in the college game, certainly there's the scheme, the plays, but more than anything, it's managing the anxiety, right? Staying focused, 75,000 people, ABC, like, okay, don't let all that stuff take you away from just what the mental side needs to look like. It's just football, it's just a game. And so I think that's, not to say you don't have to do it in the NFL, but it's certainly something we're preaching every day from the mental side of understand, you know, what that side's going to look like.
Get back to Taylor real quick. Matt was telling us, you know, last week that it feels like, you know, this is Taylor's offense now. Is it natural to say that about your starting quarterback, or what does that mean as it pertains to Taylor and your offense, what you want to do?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that, right? Because so much of what you do is tailored to what your quarterback does well, right? And so you might come into a place and say, hey, here's what my offensive system is, but you know, you'd be amazed at how much you tweak it, how much you go this way a little bit or that way a little bit based off of what your top players do, and certainly him at the quarterback position. So, but I also think this, right? I think the offense is similar enough that now it's year 2 for him. Again, the biggest thing for him, like we just touched on, is now when you know you're the guy, it's a lot different than when you're just coming off the bench, you know, and I think the expectations are through the roof, the pressure is through the roof, so how can we just stay focused one play at a time and just keep getting better?
What have you seen from Austin Bolt for the last 2 weeks on the field?
A big smile on his face. You know, I think that's just the biggest thing for guys that have gone through what he's gone through, is just how important the game is to him and how excited he is to be out there. I remember seeing Austin when he was in high school, and I just had that feeling about him, even when I was at Washington, that this guy was going to be a player. I didn't know what position necessarily, so I think he loves it. I think he's super appreciative to have gone through what he's gone through and feeling healthy again, and we're excited about it.
Could he be in the mix in Washington?
We'll see just how long, you know, how far he can come, you know, from there.
All right.
Guys, good. Appreciate you guys, man.
Thanks, Coach.